He dug her grave with his bare hands, then never left her side. Each night, the wind sang lullabies to a boy the world forgot, until one couple with empty arms decided they couldn't leave him there. The grave wasn't deep. The boy had dug it with his own hands, small, raw things, red with blisters and grit, shaking from hunger and grief. He didn't even know how graves were supposed to be, just that folks needed them, that his mother would get cold if she was left above the earth. So he dug until the soil stopped moving and her body stopped looking like her. And then he lay down beside the mound, curled tight against the wind. His name was Henry. 8 years old. He had no one left. The dirt still looked fresh, like it hadn't yet accepted the weight of the dead. A crooked wooden cross stood at the top, fashioned from 2 broken fence rails tied together with twine. The writing on it was barely legible, carved by a child who hadn't yet learned his letters. But he'd done it anyway, because she'd always told him to try. It read, "Mama." That was 4 nights ago. He hadn't left the spot since. Each morning he woke stiff and aching, dew clinging to his face like tears the earth wept with him. And each night he tucked himself against the grave again, whispering stories to the dirt, hoping she could still hear. He didn't cry much anymore. He was too tired. But sometimes the wind howled and it sounded like her voice, and he'd bury his face in the hard ground and pretend. The townsfolk knew he was there. They passed him on the way to the church or the mercantile or the post station. They saw the thin frame, the swollen eyes, the way he limped to fetch water from the stream and returned to that lonely patch beside the churchyard like a ghost walking its haunt. But they didn't stop. Not really. A few had dropped bread once. One woman had offered to take him to the orphanage in Haybrook, but when he didn't answer, just stared and clutched the cross tighter, she hadn't pressed. No one really wanted him. That was until the horse-drawn cart pulled into town on a Thursday morning. The wheels were creaky, the mule old and slow, but it carried 2 souls who hadn't been seen in Mercy Hollow for over a year. Not since the doctor had delivered the final news. Not since everything they'd prayed for had slipped from their fingers. Clara and Amos Whitfield. They had come back not because they wanted to, but because Clara's sister had passed and left them a plot of land to tend. They were older than most would expect parents to be, he with gray already streaking his beard, she with laugh lines that hadn't felt a reason to deepen in years. But there was a hollowness between them, a quiet space neither of them knew how to fill. Their wagon rolled past the church, past the general store, and then slowed. Clara's hand found Amos's arm. She whispered something low, almost unbelieving. "There's a child." He turned just slightly and saw Henry. The boy was sitting beside the grave again, hunched over, a crust of old cornbread in one hand, unmoving. They should have kept going. Amos knew better. The boy wasn't their burden. They had already grieved enough in this life, already tried and failed and tried again, but Clara's grip on his arm tightened. "Stop the wagon." He did. She stepped down carefully, skirt brushing against the dry weeds. She approached slowly like one might approach a skittish colt. Not too fast, not too loud. The boy didn't look up until her shadow blocked the sun. "What's your name?" she asked gently. His voice was hoarse when he answered, "Henry." Her eyes shifted to the grave, then back to him. "This your mama?" He nodded. "I'm Clara, this here's Amos. We just came back to town. I got a little stew back at the cabin if you're hungry." Henry said nothing, just stared. Then quietly, "I can't leave her." Clara swallowed hard. Her eyes shimmered, but she held them steady. "I understand." She sat beside him, on the ground, right there in the dust. Amos stood by the cart, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching. "I used to sit like this too," Clara said softly. "When my baby passed, I sat beside her little stone every day, just waited, didn't know what else to do." Henry's eyes flicked toward her. "She ain't gone," he said. "I talk to her still." Clara nodded. "That's all right." They stayed like that for a long while, just sitting. When the sun dipped low, Amos finally spoke. "It'll freeze tonight." Henry didn't respond. Clara turned to him. "You can come stay, just one night, keep warm, we'll bring you back in the morning, you can see her again." Henry looked at the grave. Then at Clara. Then he stood. Inside the cabin he barely spoke, ate quietly, washed his hands when she told him to, sat on the edge of the cot with his boots still on as if he didn't believe it would last. Clara laid out an extra quilt. Amos kept his distance, offering only a nod when the boy passed him. That night Clara found Henry in the corner, curled up on the floor instead of the bed. "You can sleep on the cot, sugar." "It ain't right," he whispered. "She's out there in the cold." Clara knelt beside him. "She'd want you warm." "I used to lay beside her, so she wouldn't be alone." Clara's breath hitched. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "She's not alone now, not really, and you don't have to be either." But he didn't move. The next morning, when Clara stirred from sleep, the cot was empty. The door creaked on its hinges. Henry was gone. Out in the yard, snow had begun to fall again, thin flakes dancing like ash. Amos found the tracks first, small and winding back toward the churchyard. When Clara saw them, she pulled her shawl tight and ran. She found him back at the grave, shivering, knees tucked to his chest, tears finally falling slow and soundless. "You left before I could make you breakfast," Clara said gently, kneeling beside him again. He didn't respond. She wrapped the extra blanket she'd brought around his shoulders. Then she said the words before even realizing she meant them. "You could stay, longer I mean, if you wanted." Henry looked at her, eyes raw. "I don't know how," he whispered. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "You don't have to know yet, you just have to be." Amos was behind them now, arms crossed again, watching, listening. "You said you used to sit like this," Henry said suddenly, "with your baby." Clara nodded slowly. "What happened to her?" Her voice cracked. "She didn't make it, we tried, a long time, she couldn't stay." Henry looked down at his mother's grave again, then back at Clara. "Maybe she's with her," he whispered. Clara blinked, then smiled through tears. "Maybe she is." For the first time in days, Henry leaned into someone, just slightly, just enough. Amos watched from the fence line, then turned back toward the cabin, his shoulders heavier than before. Clara stayed with Henry until the wind picked up again, until snow started to gather in the corners of the fence posts. When she stood, she held out a hand. "Let's go home." Henry hesitated. But then he took it. The snow had melted into a thin crust by mid-morning, and the path from the churchyard back to the cabin glistened like old glass under the sun's weak gaze. Clara didn't speak as they walked, her hand still clasping Henry's, her other arm holding the basket she'd brought, filled with a fresh blanket, a jar of stew, and a tin cup that rattled softly with each step. She hadn't planned to take him back that morning. Not yet. But there was something in the boy's silence, something more than grief, something harder, that told her rushing him would only drive him deeper into the cold. Behind them, the wooden cross still stood. The wind tugged at its twine like fingers pulling on memory. Henry walked with his head down, boots dragging with each step. He hadn't said a word since he left the grave, and Clara hadn't pushed. She remembered the days when even breathing felt like betrayal. Some hurts needed space. Some pain needed quiet. At the cabin, Amos was stacking firewood against the side wall. His face was unreadable, brow low, mouth set in that line Clara had come to know too well. He hadn't spoken much since she brought Henry back. He'd always been a quiet man, but now silence felt like armor. And Clara understood that too. Amos didn't take to change lightly, especially not change shaped like a child. Henry stepped over the threshold, paused by the door, and looked around like it was the first time he was truly seeing the place. The hearth still held a faint warmth from the night before. A kettle of water sat ready, and the smell of coffee clung to the walls. Clara set the basket down and began unpacking without a word. She handed Henry the tin cup and poured him warm broth, stirring in a bit of dried thyme. He sipped slowly, his small hands cradling the warmth like it might vanish if he blinked. "You can stay here today," Clara said softly. "If you want, no one'll make you leave." Henry didn't answer, but he didn't protest either. Amos entered, snow clinging to his boots. He glanced once at Henry, then to Clara. She met his gaze, firm but quiet, the kind of look only a wife who'd fought too many battles for softness could give. Amos gave a single nod, then went to hang his coat. They made it through the day in pieces. Henry helped Clara wash carrots and peel potatoes. He didn't speak, but he followed her rhythm. When she moved slow, he did too. When she let the water boil over just to watch it hiss, he watched with her. At one point he looked up and asked where the knife was. Clara froze, then handed it to him. He didn't do anything but use it to slice a piece of bread. Later, Amos asked him to pass the nails while he fixed a loose hinge on the barn door. The boy handed them over without looking up, silent as stone. Amos said, "Thanks." Henry didn't reply, but he didn't leave either. When dusk came, Clara lit a lantern. Its glow painted soft light across the small kitchen table. She laid out supper, stew, bread, a jar of beans she'd preserved last season, and waited for Henry to sit. He hovered by the wall, unsure, until Clara pulled out a chair. "This one's yours," she said. He sat. Amos blessed the food. His voice was rough, like a man who hadn't prayed aloud in a long while, but it carried weight. Clara bowed her head, lips moving in silence. Henry didn't know the words, but he closed his eyes anyway. They ate without much talk. The clink of spoons and scrape of bowls was enough. After Clara set a pillow and quilt on the cot again, Henry sat on it, staring at the fire. "You think she'll be cold?" he asked, voice barely there. Clara didn't pretend not to understand. She sat beside him. "The ground holds warmth longer than you'd think, and the Lord watches over her now." Henry's lip quivered. "She said I was her whole world." "I believe that," Clara whispered, "and I think she'd want you to keep going, to live like you mattered, because you do." He looked up at her then, not quite trusting, but not turning away. The first tear fell. Clara reached over and held his hand. That night he slept on the cot, didn't curl up on the floor, didn't wait until the fire went low to slip outside. He stayed. And when the morning came, he was still there. In the days that followed, Henry began to move like a boy again. Not all at once. Some mornings he wouldn't speak at all. Some nights he'd stare at the ceiling like he expected it to vanish and drop him back in the dirt beside the grave. But he moved. He fetched eggs, helped Clara grind cornmeal, carried water from the stream. Amos showed him how to patch the barn roof. Henry watched first, then climbed the ladder without a word. By sunset they'd fixed 3 shingles and Amos had said, "You learn quick." The boy only nodded, but his mouth twitched, almost a smile. One evening, Clara caught Henry standing by the window, staring out at the frost-covered yard. "You ever think about going back?" he asked. She set down the pan she was drying. "To town." He shook his head. "To the grave." Clara stepped beside him. "Sometimes I go when I need to talk to her. You can go too, whenever you need." Henry frowned. "Feels like I'm leaving her behind." Clara touched his shoulder gently. "You're not. You're carrying her with you every step." The next morning, Henry asked if he could plant flowers near the porch. "Mama liked yellow ones," he said. Clara nodded. "Then we'll plant a whole row." They did, side by side, digging shallow holes, placing seeds gently into the ground. Amos watched from the barn. Later that week, Henry asked Amos if he ever wanted kids. The man froze mid-step. Then said, "We tried. Long time, never happened." Henry stared at his boots. "Oh." Amos cleared his throat. "Sometimes the Lord gives things in his time, not ours." Henry's fingers twisted the hem of his shirt. Do you think he meant for me to come here?" Amos looked down at the boy. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "Maybe he did." That night the wind kicked up. A real storm rolled in, lightning flashing over the hills, thunder growling deep like an old wounded bear. Henry bolted awake, eyes wild. He stumbled out of bed, breathing hard, chest tight. Clara met him in the hallway, lantern already in hand. "You're all right," she said, gathering him close. "Just a storm." He clung to her like he might fall apart. "She used to hold me when it stormed," he whispered. Clara closed her eyes, holding him tighter. "Then I'll do the same." She brought him to their room. Amos slid over without a word. Henry curled between them, finally sleeping as the rain beat against the roof like footsteps from a world he'd left behind. But peace never lasts forever. The first sign of trouble came from town. A man named Burke came riding in on a fine black horse. He was dressed too clean, wore boots that didn't look scuffed, and smelled of money and paper. He asked for the Whitfields. Said he'd come from Haybrook. Said there'd been an inquiry. said the boy wasn't theirs, and that someone wanted him back. Clara felt her knees weaken as he spoke. We didn't take him, she said. He came to us. Burke only smiled. Still, there's laws. If he's not claimed proper, he's government property. Goes to the orphanage. Amos stepped forward. Over my dead body. Burke raised an eyebrow. Let's hope it don't come to that. They had 3 days. 3 days before the town, Marshall would come to escort the boy to Haybrook. Henry listened from the doorway, face pale. Clara turned, but he was already gone. She found him by the field, throwing rocks into the stream. I don't want to go, he whispered. You don't have to. But they're making me. Clara knelt beside him. We're gonna fight it. Henry's jaw trembled. What if we lose? She wrapped her arms around him. Then we'll find another way. Amos didn't sleep that night. Neither did Clara. And neither did Henry. Because family wasn't something you could undo with papers. And love wasn't something the law could erase. But storms come in many forms. And some don't pass easy. The sun rose blood orange the next morning, a color Clara had never trusted. Amos stood on the porch already, boots planted like they'd grown into the floorboards overnight. He hadn't said much since the man Burke left. His coffee sat untouched on the railing, steam curling up into nothing. Clara watched him from the kitchen window, towel in hand, heart a brick inside her chest. Henry hadn't stirred yet, but she knew he'd heard it all. The boy missed nothing, not anymore. That kind of listening came from being alone too long. When he finally stepped out from the small bedroom, Clara caught the way his eyes flicked toward the front door, toward Amos. She didn't speak at first, just handed him a warm biscuit wrapped in cloth and a tin cup of milk. He took it, murmured a thank you without really meaning it, and sat at the table in the same chair he always did. But he didn't eat. Clara sat across from him. We have 3 days. Henry looked up, eyes hollow, and then, we'll figure it out. You said that before, when Burke came, but he had papers, said I don't belong here. You do, she said firmly. You belong. He looked away. Amos stepped back inside then, voice low. We need to talk. Clara stood. Henry followed. The 3 of them gathered in the small sitting room, lit only by the dim gray light filtering through the lace curtains. I don't care what that man said, Amos began. I won't let them take him. Henry blinked. You don't have to. You're not going back to some place with cold walls and no name on the bed, Amos cut in. You hear me? You've already been buried once. I won't let them do it again. Henry's lips parted like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. Clara stepped in gently. There might be a way, I've been thinking. I could talk to Pastor Emmett. He baptized Henry's mama. He knew her. If we can find proof she had family here, maybe we can say Henry's staying with kin. She didn't, Henry murmured. What? Clara asked. My mama. She didn't have anyone. She said we were all we had. That's why she came to the church. She thought maybe someone would help if something happened to her. Clara's heart sank. Amos exhaled slowly. Even if we had a name, they'd poke holes in it. She was sick, Henry said. Long before she died. That's why she made me dig the grave ahead of time. She knew. She told me to be brave. Silence fell heavy. Then Clara knelt in front of him. What about your father? Do you know anything about him? Henry shook his head. She never said. There's got to be someone who will vouch for you. Someone who will say this is your home. Henry looked down at his hands. They were clenched tight. I don't need a home, he whispered. I just need you. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She reached up and cupped his cheek. Then that's what you have. Amos cleared his throat behind her, and when Clara turned, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time, tears. He rubbed at his face roughly, muttered something about needing to fetch tools, and walked out the door. By midday, Clara was in town. She didn't like it, leaving the boy back at the cabin with Amos, but she had no choice. Pastor Emmett was her only chance. If anyone knew anything, it'd be him. The church was quiet when she stepped in. Dust hung in beams of light that slanted through the stained glass, casting colored shadows on the worn pews. She found Emmett polishing the altar, sleeves rolled up, back bent. He straightened when he saw her. Clara Whitfield, he said kindly. It's been a long time. I need your help, she said. His smile faded. They sat in the front pew. Clara told him everything, about Henry, his mother, the grave, the visitor from Haybrook. Emmett listened without interrupting. When she finished, he let out a long sigh. I remember her, he said. Margaret Lane, quiet woman, always sat in the back, never caused trouble, had the boy wrapped up in a shawl even in summer. Was there anything at all on record, a sponsor, a next of kin? She wrote one name in the church ledger, Emmett said, rising and walking toward the back room. He returned moments later with a thick book, leather cracked at the spine. Just one. He flipped through the pages, stopped, then tapped his finger on a line. Amos Whitfield. Clara's breath left her. What? She listed him as emergency contact, said he once offered her work, cleaning out stables. Clara stared, but he never mentioned. Emmett shrugged. Maybe he didn't remember, it was years ago, but it's in the record, that's legal, that's something. Clara took the page in both hands, barely breathing. Will you make a copy? She asked. He nodded, of course. 10 minutes later, she walked out of the church with a copy of the page tucked into her coat, heart pounding. It wasn't much, but it was more than they had yesterday. It was enough to stall Burke, maybe even win. But as she passed the sheriff's office, she froze. Burke was there, speaking to Sheriff Dowse, hand resting on a folder thick with papers. He turned, saw her, smiled. She kept walking. Vast. Didn't stop until she reached the cart. Didn't breathe easy until she was down the road, trees closing in around her like arms. Back at the cabin, Henry was sitting with Amos on the porch steps. They weren't talking, just watching the chickens peck around the yard. When Clara pulled up, Henry rose first. Amos followed slower. Clara held up the paper. I found something, she said breathlessly. Margaret put your name in the church ledger as contact. That's something, Amos, that makes him yours. Amos blinked. Mine. She nodded. In writing, we can say she left him to us, that we've got claim. Amos stared at the page like it was a map he hadn't seen before. Henry's eyes darted between them. So I can stay. Clara crouched down and pulled him close. We'll fight, and this time we've got more than hope. The next morning, Burke returned. He brought a wagon with 2 men from Haybrook. They wore long coats and stiff expressions, hands resting too close to their belts. Clara met them at the porch. Amos stood behind her. Henry stayed inside. We have a claim, Clara said, holding out the paper. Burke took it, read it slowly. Then laughed. An old church record, that ain't binding. It's more than enough, Amos said. It says you wanted him with us. The man from Haybrook stepped forward. Ma'am, we're not here to argue. We've got a job to do. This boy's on a list. No family on record, unless you've got full custody. He's got us, Clara snapped, and that's all he needs. The man looked to Burke. We take him. They want to fight it, they do it through court. Clara stepped in front of the door. You're not taking him. One of the men put a hand on her arm. And that's when Amos moved. He didn't yell. Didn't threaten. He just stepped off the porch, eyes steady, and said, touch my wife again and you'll see why folks around here don't. The man hesitated. Burke sighed, let's not make a mess. He gestured, come on, we'll get a writ, come back with papers. They left. But the threat stayed behind. That night Henry didn't eat. He sat on the floor again, back to the wall. Clara crouched beside him. You all right? He didn't look at her. I don't want them to take me. They won't. You don't know that. Clara reached for him. He let her this time. You know what Amos said after you went to bed last night, she whispered. Henry shook his head. He said he'd stand in front of that door till the roof caved in if it meant keeping you here. Henry looked up. Really? Really? The boy blinked. And for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Just barely. Just enough. But outside, the wind picked up again. And in town, someone was signing a paper with Henry's name on it. Because love isn't always enough to hold back the world. but sometimes it's enough to hold each other through the storm. They didn't sleep much after that. The cabin felt tighter. Every creak in the walls, every brush of wind against the windows felt like boots on the porch. Henry lay on the cot but didn't close his eyes. Clara sat beside him, mending a shirt that didn't need mending, just to keep her hands busy. Amos leaned against the doorframe with his shotgun close, eyes shadowed and silent. Outside, the frost clung to the trees like bone. The moon passed overhead slow and heavy, dragging the hours with it. In town, the writ was being drafted. Sheriff Dowse didn't want any part of it. He told Clara as much when she'd come to plead again, but his hands were tied. "You know how it goes," he'd said. "Once the state files come in, I got no say. It's procedure." Amos didn't believe in procedure. He believed in what he could hold, what he could see. A boy with blisters on his palms and grief in his lungs wasn't paperwork to him. He was real, and real things had to be protected. The next morning, Clara woke with a start. The fire had gone out sometime in the early dawn hours, and the cold had slipped into the floorboards. Henry was gone from the cot. She found him out by the fence, staring east toward the churchyard. "You hungry?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter. He didn't look at her. "They're gonna come soon." She stepped beside him. "Yes." Henry swallowed. "What if I run?" Clara knelt slowly. "You'd freeze, and even if you didn't, they'd find you." He turned to her then, his face unreadable. "I'd rather freeze than go." "No," she said, voice firm but warm. "You don't say that." He blinked, "But it's true." Clara took his hand, small and cold and shaking. "You've survived too much to give up now. You hear me?" Henry looked away, eyes glistening. They stood like that for a long moment. Then Amos called from the porch, "Someone's coming." They turned. Dust rose at the edge of the road, and Burke's wagon appeared again, this time with a fourth man, one Henry didn't recognize, but whose coat bore a county seal. Clara's stomach dropped. This was the end of asking nicely. They came up the path slow, like they expected a fight. Clara stepped forward first. The fourth man spoke. "Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. Whitfield, I'm Benjamin Cord. I'm here under authority of the county to collect the minor, Henry Lane. He's to be placed under temporary care of Haybrook's Juvenile Services until a formal guardianship is established." "He's already under care," Clara said. "Ours." "There's no legal guardianship on file," Cord replied, pulling papers from his satchel. "We've got record of his mother's death. No father listed. No formal claim of adoption, which means he's ours in every way that matters," Amos growled. Cord sighed. "I understand, but this is not optional." He looked past them toward the window. "I need the boy." Henry stood inside, frozen in place. Clara moved quickly, blocking the steps. "No." Cord raised a hand. "Ma'am, if you interfere." "He belongs here." "That's not your call." "Then whose is it?" Amos stepped beside her. "Some man in an office who never saw him sleep beside his mama's grave, who never watched him flinch at thunder or eat like the world might end again before supper." Cord opened his mouth to speak, but something about Amos's face silenced him. Burke finally cut in. "If you keep pushing this, we'll bring the marshal. He'll come with iron and rope and a badge, and the boy'll go one way or another." Henry stepped out then. Clara turned. "No." But he walked past her. Slow, head high, hands shaking. "I'll go," he said. Clara gasped. "Henry." He didn't look at her. "I don't want them hurt." Cord nodded. "It's for the best." Amos's fists clenched, but Clara grabbed his arm. Henry climbed into the wagon. Burke grinned like he'd won something. The wheels turned. And the boy was gone. The cabin felt empty. Not just quiet, empty. Like the walls had exhaled and let something go they couldn't get back. Clara sat at the table, with the blanket Henry had slept under clutched in her lap. Amos stood by the door for hours. Neither spoke. The second night passed without rest. On the third, Clara finally broke. She stood suddenly, knocking over the chair, and said, "We can't just sit here." Amos turned. "What are we supposed to do?" "Something." He hesitated, then nodded. They rode into Haybrook by dusk. The orphanage sat on a hill, gray stone and darker windows. It had once been a hospital during the war, now converted into housing for the discarded. Clara hated it on sight. Inside, the woman at the front desk barely looked up. Visiting hours are over. We're not visitors, Clara said. We're here for Henry Lane. The woman blinked. Lane, she flipped through a ledger. Transferred this morning. Clara's heart stuttered. What? Relocated to the county holding center until proper placement. Too many mouths here. Where's the holding center? East of Ridgeline. That was a day's ride. They didn't stop for rest. By dawn, they reached the building, a squat brick thing with bars on the windows. Inside, it smelled like bleach and hopelessness. A man at the desk squinted at them. Name. Henry Lane, Clara said. We're here to take him home. The man checked a list. No visitation without clearance. We're not visiting, Amos said. We're his guardians. The man looked up. That right. We've got proof, Clara said, pulling out the church ledger copy. He studied it. Then shook his head. Not enough. Let us see him, she said, please. The man paused. Then sighed. 5 minutes, room 3. Henry was thinner. His face paler, clothes ill-fitting. But when he saw them, his eyes widened. Clara, Amos. She rushed forward and hugged him tight. You came. Of course we did, she whispered. Did you think we would? He nodded into her shoulder. I hoped. Amos stepped forward, crouched beside them. We're getting you out. Henry looked between them. How? We're going to court, Clara said. We'll make this right. He frowned. What if they say no? Amos touched his shoulder. Then we keep fighting. The courthouse loomed like a threat. They filed the paperwork. A date was set. 2 weeks. In the meantime, Henry would stay under protective custody. Clara hated the phrase. They returned to the cabin, alone again. But this time they didn't collapse. They planned. They prayed. They prepared. 2 weeks later, they stood before a judge in a room colder than the holding center. The prosecutor laid out facts. No legal claim, no blood relation, no adoption filed, no precedent. Clara laid out truth. The grave, the winter, the quiet way Henry had fit into their lives like he'd always been there. Amos spoke last. He doesn't have our blood, but he's got our name. He's got our table, our home. He's ours. The judge listened. And then stood. I will review the case. They waited outside in silence. Henry sat between them. Clara held his hand. Amos kept his eyes forward. And then the door opened. The judge returned. Papers in hand. Heart in his eyes. I see no reason to remove this boy from the only family he has. The guardianship is approved. Clara wept. Henry buried his face into her lap. Amos said nothing. But his eyes glistened. They returned home under a sky full of stars. Henry ran to the chickens first. Then the porch. Then the cot. He lay down and said, It smells like me. Clara laughed and Amos just nodded. That night they ate stew by the fire. The wind outside was softer now. And the silence in the cabin no longer echoed. It just waited. For tomorrow. For more. Because family isn't always born. Sometimes it's made from love, from fight, from the refusal to let go. The days that followed felt like waking from a long storm. Henry no longer watched the door like someone was going to take him again. He no longer whispered apologies when he left a mess or hesitated before asking if he could take more stew. Instead, he spoke without flinching, laughed without permission, ran barefoot across the yard and shouted the names of the hens like they were old friends come to visit. Clara called it a miracle. Amos called it spring. Whatever it was, the weight that had once lived in Henry's shoulders began to lift, and he started walking like a boy again. Not a ghost, not a burden, a boy. On the first Sunday after the judge's ruling, Clara ironed Henry's shirt herself, careful not to press too hard on the sleeves he always rolled up anyway. We're going to church, she said. Proper, together. Henry blinked. Won't people talk? Let them, Amos muttered from the doorway, fixing the collar of his coat. They'll get used to it. Henry hesitated a moment longer, then nodded. At the church, whispers followed them. Some surprised, some smug, others curious. But Pastor Emmett greeted them at the door with open arms and a firm handshake for Amos. Clara caught sight of Miss Jeanie from the bakery, mouthing something about how sweet it all was, and old man Trude tipping his hat. Henry stood between Clara and Amos as the hymns rang through the wooden beams, his voice soft but steady. Clara cried during the closing prayer, not because she was sad, but because it was the first time the boy had knelt between them like he belonged. Because for once, no one could say he didn't. Later in the churchyard, Henry visited the grave. Clara let him go alone. He knelt down, pressed a wildflower against the wood, and whispered something no one heard but God. When he returned to her side, he looked older somehow, not in years, in knowing. I told her I'm all right now, he said, and that I have folks. Clara kissed the top of his head. You always did. Summer came in gentle waves. Clara taught Henry how to knead dough and told him when the clouds meant hail. Amos showed him how to oil the plow and explained how to read the sky like a map. The days passed in the way good things do, quietly, with dust and laughter and the occasional scraped knee or burned loaf. But shadows don't vanish, they just step back for a while. And trouble, like summer lightning, can come even when the sky looks clear. It began with a knock. A polite one, 2 soft raps, nothing urgent, nothing loud. Clara answered the door with a smile that didn't last long. A woman stood there, mid-30s tall, dressed in faded blue, hair pinned tight under a bonnet. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind. I'm looking for Henry Lane, she said. Clara's breath caught. Who are you? The woman extended a paper. My name is Sarah Griggs. I work for the National Registry of Child Welfare. I have reason to believe Henry Lane is in your care. Clara didn't take the paper. He's ours. I'm not here to take him, just to ask a few questions. Amos had joined them by now, stepping beside Clara like the solid post he always was. What kind of questions? About his mother, his birth, his parentage. Clara frowned. We already went through this. Sarah nodded. Yes, but we found new documents, a birth certificate unsigned, and a note, a name. Henry's mother may have had surviving relatives, possibly even someone searching for him. That changed everything. Henry had always said his mother had no one, that they were all each other had, but a note, a name. Who? Amos asked. Sarah hesitated. A man named Warren Lane, from 3 Pines, claims to be the boy's uncle. Clara shook her head. He's never mentioned him. Sarah looked down at her folder. The man said he lost touch with his sister years ago, that he only just found records of her death. He's asking for a meeting, not custody, not yet, just a meeting. Clara felt something twist in her stomach. Amos narrowed his eyes. Henry's just starting to feel safe. You come in here and shake that loose. I'm not here to cause harm, Sarah said gently. I just want the boy to have the truth. That night Clara sat by Henry's bedside. He was curled under the quilt, the tips of his fingers poking out. There's someone who says he might be your uncle, she said softly. Henry didn't move. Mama said we didn't have anyone. She may not have known. He stared at the ceiling. His name's Warren. He lives in 3 Pines. Says he only found out what happened to your mother recently. I don't want to go, Henry said quickly. You don't have to, Clara said, not unless you want to meet him. Henry was quiet for a long time. Then can you come too? Clara smiled. Of course. 3 Pines was 2 towns over, past a ridgeline and a crooked riverbed. They left early, taking the cart and packing a lunch. Henry sat between them, quiet but calm. When they arrived, they were directed to a small house on the edge of a barley field, smoke curling from its chimney and a dog barking somewhere in the back. Warren Lane stepped onto the porch before they could knock. He was lean, older than Clara expected, with deep lines in his face and hands that looked like they'd worked more than they'd rested. His eyes locked on Henry instantly, and something behind them broke. You look like her, he said. Henry stiffened. Warren stepped down slowly. I didn't know she passed. I would have come, I swear it. We hadn't spoken in years. After the war, she left and never came back. He glanced at Clara and Amos, then knelt in front of Henry. I'm not here to take you. I just wanted to see you, make sure you were all right. Henry stared at him. Why now? I found an old letter, Warren said, tucked in a box my mother left behind. Said Margaret had a son, that she was struggling. I started searching after that. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Henry took it. It was his mother's handwriting. Clara recognized it instantly. She'd seen it in the margins of a Bible they kept on the shelf. The letter wasn't much, just a few lines. Warren, if this ever finds you, I named him Henry. I'm trying, but I don't know how much longer I'll make it. If you ever find him, tell him I tried, that I loved him, that he wasn't alone. Henry's fingers trembled. He folded the letter and held it to his chest. I thought we had no one, he whispered. You had me, Clara said quietly, stepping forward. Henry looked at her, then at Warren. Can I have two? Warren blinked. Two what? Two families. A long pause. Then the old man smiled. I'd be honored. They didn't stay long, just tea on the porch. A photo taken on Warren's porch steps. Henry asked a few questions. Warren answered gently. No pressure, no big asks, just conversation. On the way back, Clara watched Henry's face in the fading light. He looked thoughtful, not sad, not scared. Just full. Like something long missing had finally returned. That night back at the cabin, Henry sat beside Amos at the fire. He's not taking me right. Amos shook his head. You're not going anywhere you don't want to. Henry nodded. Good, because this is home. Clara sat in her rocker, watching the flames. Do you think Mama would be proud? Henry asked. Clara answered without hesitation. I know she would. Henry leaned into Amos. Clara set her knitting aside. And in the quiet, under the weight of all they'd lost and all they'd found, the three of them sat like roots deep in the earth, weathered but strong. Because family doesn't end at names. It ends where you stop running and start belonging. The valley turned gold before the leaves did. Late summer in Mercy Hollow meant morning mist on the fields and the far-off hum of crickets long after sundown. Amos said the land breathed easier this time of year, like the earth knew its work was mostly done and could finally rest its bones. Clara felt the same. Her joints ached less, her breath came easier, and the sharpness that used to live behind her eyes had softened into something steadier, something that flickered warm when Henry called out her name from across the field. He'd taken to chores without being told, fed the chickens before sunrise, hauled water from the stream in buckets that used to look twice his size. He learned to sharpen Amos's tools and how to fold Clara's laundry the way she liked, though he often snuck a few extra minutes of play when no one was looking. He'd found a stray cat that followed him everywhere and named it Cole on account of its missing tail and soot-black fur. It slept at the foot of his cot and hissed at strangers. He was no longer a boy hiding beside a grave. He was home. But home has its own ghosts, not always from the past, sometimes from the present, wearing familiar faces, riding up your road like they were welcome. Clara spotted the rider first. Late one afternoon, just as the sun began its slow dip behind the ridge. She'd been in the kitchen, rolling dough, when the low creak of saddle leather reached her ears. She stepped onto the porch, wiped her hands on her apron, and saw the man dismount. Tall, hat low, brown coat with dust on the shoulders and a rifle slung casually across his back. He looked up, smiled like a man who'd already made himself comfortable. Afternoon, he called. Amos stepped out behind her, wiping his hands on a rag. Henry came running from the barn, then slowed when he saw the stranger. Can we help you? Amos asked. The man doffed his hat. Name's Mercer. I'm a cousin to Warren Lane. Heard the boy was staying here. Clara stiffened. Warren never mentioned you. Mercer chuckled. Warren don't mention much. Keeps his mouth shut, which is why I like him. Heard he met the boy, said the kid's sharper than most. Figured I'd come meet him myself. Amos narrowed his eyes. What for? Mercer shrugged. Just curious. Blood ought to know blood, don't you think? Clara didn't answer. Mercer turned his gaze on Henry, who stood frozen halfway to the porch. You must be Henry. You look like your ma. She was my second cousin, I believe. Or third. Hard to keep track. Henry didn't respond. Mercer smiled tighter. You don't say much, that's all right. Quiet's good. Quiet kids last longer. Amos stepped forward. That your idea of friendly? The stranger raised both hands. Easy now, didn't mean harm, just wanted to meet the boy. Maybe talk a little family business. We're not interested, Clara said. Mercer's smile faded. That's so. It is. He looked at Henry again, then turned back toward his horse. Well, I suppose I'll be on my way, but you let Warren know I stopped by, will you? We will, Amos said. Mercer mounted his horse and tipped his hat once more. You folks take care, never know who's watching. With that he rode off down the trail, the clop of hooves slow and steady, fading into the dusk. That night Henry lay awake. The cot creaked softly as he shifted under the quilt. Cole sat curled at his feet, tail twitching in its sleep. Clara passed his door twice, pausing the second time. You all right? She asked. Henry didn't answer for a moment. Who was he really? We don't know, Clara said honestly, but I'll speak to Warren tomorrow, find out what's what. Henry turned to face her. He looked at me like he already owned something. Clara walked in, sat beside the cot, and smoothed the blanket over him. You're not anyone's to own. He nodded slowly. I believe you. The next day Clara wrote to Warren, asked about Mercer, about his story, his claim. The reply came by courier 3 days later. Warren's words were blunt. Never heard of him, not family, not to Henry. Tell Amos to keep his rifle close. That night Amos cleaned the rifle on the porch while Henry sat beside him, listening to the slow scrape of metal on stone. Would you shoot him? Henry asked. Amos didn't look up. If I had to. What if he comes back? He won't be the first man I've turned away with a loaded barrel. Henry nodded slowly. I'm not afraid, not really, just tired of new names. Amos glanced at him. Family's not about blood, boy, it's about who stays. We stayed, you stayed, that's what counts. Henry leaned against the porch post, watching the stars. I think I like staying. But staying doesn't stop trouble. 2 days later, Henry didn't come back from town. He'd gone with Clara to fetch flour and a bit of kerosene. She'd sent him across the street to pick up cloth from Miss Jeannie while she settled accounts at the general store. When she stepped outside, he was gone. Jeannie said he never arrived. Clara's heart near stopped. She ran the streets, asked the blacksmith, the wheelwright, even the preacher. No one had seen him. By sundown, Amos was on horseback, rifle slung across his shoulder, teeth clenched so tight his jaw ached. They searched the creek beds, the hayfields, every crooked shed and lean-to in Mercy Hollow. No sign. But near the old fork road that led to the canyon pass, they found tracks. 2 sets. One small. One booted. Heading east. Clara dropped to her knees beside them. Henry. Amos pulled her gently up. Get home, boil water, light every lamp. Where are you going? He checked the rifle, to bring our son back. The trail curved sharp through scrub and thorn. Moonlight lit the tracks like silver ink, and Amos followed them with the patience of a hunter and the rage of a father. 2 miles out he found a scarf Henry's, tied to a branch like a signal. He rode harder. Near midnight, he reached the abandoned shack at Creek's Hollow. Inside he found Mercer. And Henry. Bound to a chair. Gagged. Eyes wide. Mercer looked up, calm as Sunday service. Well, he said, standing slowly, didn't expect you so soon. Amos raised the rifle, step away. Mercer smirked, you'll want to hear me out. I'm not here to talk. Then let me, Mercer said, one hand casually reaching for his coat. Amos cocked the rifle, don't. Mercer froze. All right, no tricks. He stepped aside. Amos crossed the room and cut Henry free. The boy collapsed into his arms, breath ragged. "I'm okay," Henry whispered. "Didn't cry." Amos held him close. "You did fine." Mercer leaned against the wall. "You think he's safer with you?" "He's not yours," Amos growled. "He's worth a lot to the right people. People who collect things, names. He's got a background, a story. Those things sell." Amos saw red. "You're talking about a child." "I'm talking about legacy. Orphans fetch more than cattle in some places, especially when they're photogenic." Amos didn't answer. He just stepped forward and hit Mercer so hard the man dropped like a felled tree. Amos looked at Henry. "Let's go home." They returned to the cabin by sunrise. Clara met them on the porch, weeping. She didn't ask questions, just held Henry until he stopped shaking. Later, Amos went back. Told the sheriff everything. By nightfall, Mercer was in chains. Clara boiled stew. Henry sat at the table, silent. Then he looked up. "Amos." "Yeah. Would it be okay if I changed my name?" Clara paused. "Changed it to what?" Amos asked. Henry looked down. "Henry Whitfield." Clara covered her mouth. Amos nodded once. "I think that's just right." And when night fell and the fire crackled and the cat curled beside the cot, Henry lay under his quilt, whispering to a mother buried miles away. "I'm okay, Mama. I found them. They found me. I'm not alone anymore." He didn't cry. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in his life, he was home. The sheriff came to the cabin 3 days later, hat in hand, shoulders slouched in the way that said he hadn't come to deliver anything easy. The sun had barely climbed above the treetops, and the frost still laced the steps when Clara opened the door and found him there, staring down at his boots like they'd wronged him. "Morning, ma'am," he said, voice tight. "Sheriff," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron though they weren't dirty. "You come about Mercer." He nodded once. "He's dead." Clara blinked. "What?" "Strangled in his cell. Sometime last night. No sign of forced entry, but we found a note in his coat from a man named Crow. Mentioned Henry, said, assets should never walk free." The words dropped into her chest like stone. She stepped back without meaning to. "You think someone's still after him?" The sheriff looked pained. "Don't know yet, but I figured you ought to." Behind her, Amos had already moved to the gun rack. He took down both rifles and checked the ammunition. Henry stood in the hallway, unmoving. He'd heard. He always heard. Clara found him first. Still breathing but pale. Burning with fever. She screamed. Amos carried him to the cot, wrapped him in blankets, fetched snow to cool his forehead. But it wasn't enough. They needed medicine. "I'll go," Amos said, pulling on his coat. "There's no way down," Clara argued. "Not in the storm." "I'll find a way. I can't lose him." "You won't." He kissed her forehead, shouldered the rifle, and stepped into the storm. Clara sat beside Henry all day, changing cloths, muttering prayers, wiping sweat from his brow. "Don't go," she whispered. "Don't you dare leave me." He tossed in his sleep, whispered things she couldn't understand. Until at last he opened his eyes. "Amos," he croaked. "He's getting help," she said, pressing his hand. Henry smiled weakly. "He always does." Amos returned 2 days later. Nearly frozen, but alive, with medicine in his coat. He collapsed beside the fire, coughing blood. Clara screamed again. "Don't you do this to me," she hissed, wrapping him in blankets, forcing the tincture down Henry's throat. "Don't either of you leave." She sat between them, one hand on each, praying louder now, not caring if the hills heard, not caring if the wind mocked her. "I gave everything," she whispered. "Please don't take what's left." 3 days passed. The fire burned low. The snow thickened. But inside, Henry woke. Amos opened his eyes. And Clara sobbed. Not from sorrow, but from gratitude. Because some storms take everything, and others pass just in time. Because family doesn't mean no pain. It means never facing it alone. The thaw came slow. Winter doesn't leave the high country all at once. It lingers in shadows, clings to the north side of trees, and seeps into the bones of old cabins long after the sky has turned blue again. But when it broke all at once. The snow cracked underfoot instead of crunching. The creek started humming again. And Henry, for the first time in nearly a month, opened the cabin door and stepped outside with no blanket around his shoulders. He was thinner, paler than before, but steady. He blinked at the sun like it was something sacred, then let it warm his face without flinching. Beside him, Clara sat on the porch step, her mending basket forgotten in her lap, eyes never leaving the boy's outline. Amos was already in the field, shoveling snow from the garden rows, a scarf pulled tight over his mouth and a pistol tucked into the back of his belt. They hadn't spoken of Crow since the fire, since the fever, since Amos came home half frozen and refused to lie down until he'd loaded every round they owned. But he hadn't come, Crow hadn't come. And yet something about the stillness felt temporary, like the silence between heartbeats. Henry didn't ask when they'd return to Mercy Hollow. He didn't ask when they'd go back to their house, their chickens, the churchyard grave. He only asked if Amos would teach him how to hold a knife right. Clara watched them from the doorway later that morning. Amos crouched low, carving shapes into bark with Henry at his side, mimicking every stroke. Not soft, not panicked. Just deliberate. 3 slow raps. Amos raised the rifle, nodded to Clara, and stepped to the door. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a voice. Low, gravelly. "Didn't come to talk." Amos opened the door anyway. Crow stood there. Not dressed like a man of means, not in some black coat or tailored boots, just wool and dirt and a pistol holstered at his hip like every other man west of the river. But his eyes didn't blink like other men's. They were dead things, ice-colored and still. Henry saw him from the corner of the room and froze. "That's him," he whispered. Crow looked past Amos. Saw the boy. Smiled like a man seeing his horse after a long winter. "There you are," he said. Amos didn't move. Crow glanced down at the rifle. "You going to shoot me for standing on your porch?" "If I have to." "I think you will," Crow said. "You seem like the type." He stepped forward once. Amos didn't flinch. But the rifle stayed level. "You're not taking the boy," he said. Crow tilted his head. "Taking? No, I'm reclaiming what's mine." Clara's voice rang out then, sharp and clean. "He's not yours, he never was." Crow looked at her for the first time. "You're the woman who took him in." "I'm the woman who raised him." "Raised," Crow echoed, "like a calf in spring." He took one more step. And that's when Amos fired. The shot cracked like thunder in the cold. But Crow didn't fall. He staggered, grabbed his side, blood soaking through his coat. But he didn't fall. Instead, he laughed. "You shoot to warn." "I shoot to end," Amos growled, cocking the rifle again. Crow looked down at his side. Then at the snow. Then back at Amos. "You'll need more than that," he said. "There's others. You think I came alone." Amos froze. Behind them, the wind shifted. "Horses?" "More than one." Clara grabbed Henry's hand. "Go," Amos said without turning, "out the back." Clara didn't argue. She pulled Henry through the kitchen, out the back door into the woods. Snow still lined the trees, crunching underfoot. Henry stumbled once, but Clara pulled him up, never slowing. Behind them, shots rang out. The cabin, the porch, the walls Amos had built with his own hands. All of it under fire. But Amos didn't fall. He stayed. Until the bullets stopped. Until the voices faded. Until he heard Clara's whistle from the ridge, long and low and familiar. Then he ran. They met by the river. Clara had Henry wrapped in both arms, his face buried in her chest. When Amos stepped into the clearing, bleeding from his shoulder, Clara rushed forward. "I'm fine," he said. "We need to keep moving." "They're following." "They're not yet. I dropped 2 of them. One ran, one bled out. Crow's alive but limping." Henry looked up. He won't stop. No, Amos said, he won't. They walked until their legs gave out. Then they hid in a cave near the falls, one Amos remembered from a hunting trip years before. Henry sat by the fire shivering. I thought we were safe. We were, Clara said, but safety isn't a place, it's a people. You're still safe. Henry's hands trembled. He said I belonged to him. Amos sat down hard beside the boy. You don't belong to anyone, he said. Not by blood, not by paper, not by threat. You choose who you belong to, and you chose us. That's the only thing that matters. Henry's eyes glistened. Then let's stop running. Clara frowned. What? Let's end this. He stood slowly. I want to stop looking over my shoulder. I want to stop waking up scared. I want to go home. Amos looked at Clara. She nodded. Then we fight. They returned to Mercy Hollow at dawn. Clara rode straight to the sheriff. Amos rode to Warren. Henry, too small to ride alone, sat in front of Amos on the saddle, arms clutched around his waist. It was time to end it. Time to name what had been chasing them. The sheriff was waiting on the porch with 3 deputies, each armed, each silent. Heard what happened, he said. Amos nodded. He's not just a man, he's running something underground. Trafficking, the sheriff asked. Yes. Children's stories, tragedies for profit. They used orphans like product, Amos growled. Put them in paper, sold their images to the highest bidder, raised money, told lies, and Crow's still out there. The sheriff looked at Henry. Then back at Amos. Let's find him. They did. At dusk. In the woods. Bleeding and leaning against a tree like it owed him something. He raised his pistol. But Clara stepped forward. You lost, she said. Crow sneered. Nothing ever ends, lady. No, she replied, but some things get buried. She didn't raise a weapon. She just stepped aside. And the sheriff stepped in. Put the irons on him. Dragged him away. Crow screamed about lawyers, about power, about names. But no one listened. Not anymore. The house in Mercy Hollow had soot-stained walls and a burned-out barn. But it was home. They rebuilt. Board by board. Shingle by shingle. Clara planted yellow flowers along the path. Amos patched the roof. Henry carved a new name into the door. Whitfield. Not because he needed to, but because he could. Years later, people asked him about the scar on his arm, about the whisper of fear that sometimes caught his breath when he heard footsteps behind him. And Henry Whitfield would smile and say, I was born twice. Once beside a grave. Once in a cabin with a woman who never let go and a man who never backed down. Some folks find family, he'd say, others get found by it. Then he'd turn back to the field, to the boy he was raising, to the fire that never stopped burning in the hearth. Because the past doesn't vanish. But it can be rewritten. One choice at a time.